But everything that wound up in this thing, worked. It had such it reminded you of whatever the show was, even though I had never seen it. You could see the heritage built in within it. But then it was still just undeniably a star vehicle and a spectacle, like just a little bit of spectacle with some competent, conspiracy-tinged storytelling, but with all of the noir sensibilities that De Palma brings to the equation. And it's very different from all the movies that was born from its roots, but it sank them deep with this one, and I didn't always keep up with some of the newer ones. I had to circle back on a few of them, but this is the one that I keep close to my side. I don't have to go looking for it. I know I love this movie, and I think that everyone who likes Mission Impossible should really do themselves a favor and come back to it, because it's special. They don't make movies like this anymore. They stopped making movies like this right after they made this one, as Matt will discuss when we follow up with Mission Impossible 2.
And I think at the end of the day, he actually got locked out of the editing room for this movie by Cruise himself, and just got kicked to the curb essentially. Wow. And but I still get the sense that in the end John Woo won out on his vision, because this film is just a cacophony of wooisms. It's slow motion, the dual wielding pistols, the drop kicks, the bicycle kicks, the kung fu chops, and of course the pigeons.
So many fucking pigeons.
He completely misses the point of the assignment, and I don't think the film is completely without its merits, but this is the movie, this is the hump that we must get over before we get to greener pastures with this series.
Hi, mind if I touch your wiener?
Welcome to Theater and Stream, a film podcast. I am Matt, and that is Chuck, and this is episode number 8. Well, folks, it's official. After only 1 week, the summer blockbuster movie season has officially lost our attention. We're not exactly champing at the bit to devote our pursuit of cinematic knowledge to The Little Mermaid or the latest Fast and the Furious film, so we're going to be taking a bit of a detour into more worthwhile blockbuster filmmaking. And we're starting our retrospective on the Mission Impossible films. For the next 3 weeks, we'll be looking at all 6 of the films. Of course, this isn't completely random because we're less than 6 weeks away from the series' penultimate installment, Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1. Our reviews of the first 2 films are going to be coming up a little bit later in the episode, but for now, we're going to stay in the present with this week's news and our watch list. If you want to jump around the episode, you'll find timestamps in the description. If you like what you see, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. If you like what you hear, go ahead and review us on the podcast service of your choice. But anyway, that's the business end of the show. Chuck, I'll turn it over to you.
Very happy that I had an excuse to watch these movies. Angie was not. She was not impressed. She was actually quite offended that I turned Twilight off and reprogrammed our evening the other day to watching both of these movies. But that's just what domestic life is like. There's compromise, because these movies are very important to me, and I'm very glad to have the opportunity to wax, and sing their praises, even if they are horrible films. But before we get into all that, the writer's strike is still, going on, week 2, and the hits are really starting to come. People are losing their cushy contracts. Shows are getting slowed down. People are getting called scabs. What is happening? Who is really hurting the most right now?
Yeah, well, I guess it's probably the shows that, haven't quite finished writing yet and are currently in production, because what has happened this week is a couple more shows have been newly stalled out. We've got The Hedge Knight, Severance, Cobra Kai, Daredevil Born Again, and Billions. And what has happened with most of these is that they were in the writing stages, so there's really not much written, so they just had to shut it down. But in the case of Billions and Daredevil and Severance, these productions were actually shut down by picketers, by picketers going to the locations and picketing so loud that they just had to shut them down. And
wow.
So
Adam Conover, he's winning.
Yeah, it's extremely coordinated and very, very sort of impressive that they can shut down these big productions. And yeah, I think we're going to be seeing probably more of this in the weeks ahead as long as this goes on. And I guess we'll kind of see what happens there. But yeah, in addition to these shows getting newly stalled out, a couple other happenings have happened. And the first thing was, shortly after our episode last Monday, there was the MTV Movie Awards, which the host Drew Barrymore dropped out of a week before they happened. And I don't know if you saw any clips from this, but
I did not.
Oh my God, it was a mess. Like, just, I of course, I didn't watch it. I have no interest in these at all, but I did watch a couple clips, and essentially they canceled the live event because the picketers were planning on picketing the event had it happened.
And who was going to write the jokes?
Yeah, there's no jokes, there's no, a lot of people probably wouldn't have even shown up sort of in solidarity with the writers. And so what this show was reduced to was a lame ass clip show where they showed clips from past years, like, hey, remember when this happened? And then a bunch of pre-taped segments. They showed Drew Barrymore's initial sketch that opened the show, but then Drew Barrymore had no presence for the rest of the night. So it was just it felt very random.
You mean there wasn't some rerun of an old school Jersey Shore season they could have ran during that block instead? Why even do this? It's also pointless. Who wants to watch that, let alone make it?
Yeah, it was awful. They probably would have gotten better ratings by doing a rerun of Jersey Shore too.
For real though.
And they did the acceptance speeches for the awards, but they were all pre-taped and they were all clearly filmed in the actors and actresses' backyards, where they quickly set up their phone camera, and it just was very low production.
And do you think that they squeezed those in before the strike really hit?
I think that they were just very last minute. Because
very last minute.
The actors, they really have no there's nothing barring them from filming a acceptance speech,
okay.
Unless their jokes were pre-written or something like that. But it was awful. I would encourage anyone to go look at clips online of this, because it just was a train wreck. And speaking of train wrecks, Tony Gilroy got in a little bit of hot water this week because he continued production on Andor, but actually shut it down because he got a lot of flack. And I think him continuing production on that show sort of stemmed from a email that got circulated that was sent out to a lot of showrunners this past week that basically said, I think Disney and Paramount were the two companies that sent these out, and they were very similarly worded emails that basically said, "Hey, showrunners, you need to come back into work even though you can't write, and we're gonna put you to work doing bitch jobs for the week, and if you don't come in, we're gonna fucking fire you." Basically,
So
that's what it
so
said.
it's not that he was actually working on Andor. It was that they were like having him file paperwork and like get people coffee. Was like were they really making them just do
Possibly.
That is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's incredibly degrading, and yeah, like they could, I suppose, do other stuff, as production, more like production type stuff, casting type stuff, basically anything that's not writing or rewriting.
Administrative work, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yikes. Yeah. Oh, I'm just gonna dump some footage, and then watch the
Yeah.
dailies or something. Oy vey, that is really over the top. But see, but then like yeah, the extension of that though is like yeah, if you're not actively in production, are you doing anything with your overall deal? Like or are you standing in solidarity with the writers, or are you just being quiet? Depending on how you're behaving, it doesn't really matter because it seems like everyone's kind of getting cut just as a cost saving measure. It's Zaslav economics. It's his like voodoo economics for the industry now is to just cut all this dead weight. Because yeah, Ava DuVernay, you're there. We're paying you millions of dollars a year, and what the fuck are you making?
Yeah, no, that's an extension of what we were talking about.
Yeah.
DuVernay, I guess I didn't hear about that. What's the story with her?
Her overall deal is just done. They've released her from it.
Okay.
They like bought her out essentially, so that they could get her off the books. And
Okay.
because it's unlike David Simon, another Warner, because she was also in a Warner Brothers deal. And but because apparently with him, it's just because he's such a shitlord on Twitter and was just going hard in the paint for the WGA and was like actively involved in their efforts and stuff. So they were just kind of like, yeah, from his point of view, it's because of his his union action, but from their point of view, it's just a cost saving measure because. Yeah, like, well, God, what was that fucking Baltimore show he just fucking put out that I've already forgotten the name of? We Own This City, right?
Yeah,
like
something like
that was a
yeah.
long ass wait for something that was pretty limp-dicked ultimately. And yeah, I don't know. That's just my impression of the man, so I'm not too shocked. But from the sounds of it, it doesn't matter if you're a big name or not. Like if they just have you on staff so they can plug you into the holes of any writer's room in their stable of shows, you also are getting cut loose. It's like almost like a firing squad sort of situation when you get down to it. Like it's kind of weird. What is happening to this industry? Are we really like what does this tell us about the long-term effects going forward? Are we going to see deals like this anymore?
I guess I don't know because yeah, it's just what the WGA claims the studios are trying to do is basically turn the industry into like a gig economy where
Fuck.
everything
Oh,
everything is
shit.
going to be yeah, I mean writers are basically going to be like Uber drivers where everything's contract based and you're not the employee of any company ever, and you sign on to do a show and then you're immediately out the door. It's just like the video game industry works where
Yeah.
people go and you work at a video game studio for 4 years making a video game, and then the second the game ships they just lay off their entire squad and hire anew so that they can hire people for cheap, and you don't have to give anybody raises, you don't have to extend any sort of loyalty to people who have been working there for a decade or 2 decades. They're trying to do it all on the cheap.
Yeah, yikes. That really kind of drives it home, doesn't it? Oh yeah, and you're all working from home anyway. Like that's also probably part of it. Because if you're not actually on set and you're all just in a Zoom call, like the last movie to win Best Picture literally has a few frames that are of a Zoom call of them during the pandemic making the movie, which is one of like I don't know, but that says a lot about where the industry is at even. So yeah, it is just going to be, it's going to get more dystopian, more cyberpunk, and they are going to be, it's so crazy because the whole point of these organizations is to create some sort of guarantee for its members that they'll be able to thrive, survive, or at the very least subsist. And it's getting harder and harder to do any of those three. So like, what is the point of being a member of these organizations anyway? You might as well be freelance and command as much as you can for the value of your work as you can individually, because what's the point of the collective?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's, part of the reason why, I mean, I really do hope that the writers do get somewhere. I think if they can hold out long enough, they will, just like last time.
Yeah.
Because I think, I mean, this is like if the companies win on this, it's like a lose situation for everybody but them. But these, so I mean, I'm rooting for the writers. I hope that they get somewhere, and we will continue to report on this probably weekly until something resolves.
Because that is the thing. You're absolutely right. The little guys need to win here. Otherwise, we are just doomed to, algorithmically generated horrors, that like have no human involvement apart from people having their, like biometric data scanned by a computer so it can be, replicated digitally. We don't need that. Like, we need the actual human element, and the actual humans involved are crying out. So hopefully they are heard. And I really don't, like, I'm kind of at the point where I'm like, oh, all this stuff is grinding to a halt. We have nothing on late night television. Like, nothing of value has been lost, because that's kind of what's getting in the way of, all of this is, oh, we just have to keep this thing, going. It's too big to fail. These things need to break down every once in a while for the right reasons. And it's going to be fascinating to see where it winds up, because the stuff that squeaked through that we, it can be released to us as new, is, still probably, like worth watching, as long as they're giving it to us. This one, I didn't really understand what it was. I thought this was like some spin-off from like FBI, like investigates, like on CBS or something. I didn't really understand what the premise of this was. And then I watched the trailer. But what are the first 2 episodes like?
Yeah, so this is Class of '09, which is a new Hulu show from showrunner Tom Rob Smith, who did American Crime Story, more specifically the Versace season of that show.
Okay.
And so, pretty good pedigree here. And what this show basically is it's a show about FBI agents. And the sort of gimmick behind the show is that it takes place over 3 different time periods. 2006, when all of the agents are sort of new recruits at Quantico and they're being trained. And then present day, 2023, where they're sort of all in the middle of their careers. And then 2034 in the future, when they're kind of finding themselves being made redundant by technology and sort of all splitting off in their separate ways, and their lives haven't turned out quite the way that they thought they were going to. And this is pretty decent so far. I like it. The gimmick is cool. The 3 different time periods, it kind of keeps the show fresh. It keeps the show from being, one of those prime time crime shows that are on like ABC or NBC or CBS. It's not quite that, bottom of the barrel level. It's decent enough, and I really like it so far. The standout performance is probably Brian Tyree Henry, and he especially, does a good job of portraying his character at 3 different time periods, because when you meet him at Quantico, he's sort of the guy who you don't think is going to pass. He's like an overweight guy. He can't even pass the physical test. He almost gets kicked out of the academy. And then in the future timeline, he has actually become the director of the FBI.
Oh,
so
okay.
it's interesting to watch him go on that journey from sort of like the underdog to like the authoritative, like, director of the FBI. And Yeah, it's very interesting. The only complaint I really have about it is that it's after 2 episodes, I don't really have a idea of where the show is going, because they've they have to set up all three of these timelines, and because they've had to have done that, they haven't really done a good job of setting up like the main thrust of the show, like the main plot that's gonna, carry us from episode 1 to episode 8. And it's just kind of like, I don't really know where it's going yet. And I guess I'll probably keep watching though, because the idea is interesting. It's, especially in that future timeline. The future timeline is all about how, AI has basically made these agents redundant. Everything is based off of, algorithms, or what the computer says that we should do, or how we should proceed. And it kind of shows how that has affected their careers, because back in 2006, when they were coming into the academy, their careers were very, very different.
Wow. Well, you've sold me. Holy shit. Like, my mind is just running wild with all the places it could go. But I think it is fair of you to bring up the fact that, like, when you have a high concept, like a quote-unquote gimmick like this, that is as, interesting, and provoking, it really should be giving you something narratively, too, at this point. Like, if True Detective, like, it's the crime of True Detective Season 2 versus 1 and 3. Because in those first episodes of the bookend Pizzolatto seasons, you know by the jump what the fuck is going down, and like where it's going to be. There's a mystery, but you're not wondering where it's going and like what the possibilities are. But I don't know. Yeah, it shouldn't be leaving you wanting. They've invested so much into making this thing work otherwise. Because that's the same problem that Air had. Because like a lot of people during 2020, one of the only things that fueled me and kept me alive was being able to watch, content still, which is why I was so grateful to all the writers and creatives out there that had been able to make stuff, and the documentarians. And those people, included that group that did The Last Dance. And another guy was watching The Last Dance out there, and when they saw the part about how Nike was able to woo Michael Jordan, he was like, wow, that should be a movie. And then he went and wrote the screenplay for it, and then Ben Affleck and Matt Damon found it, and then it got made into a fucking movie, written, directed, and starring Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. So yeah, a lot of pedigree here, and it has the possibility of being really cool. And in general, it's pretty good. But the unfortunate thing undermining it, and I'll just put it out there right away, is that there's not a hell of a lot of drama here. It's held up by the performances. It's held up by the production design, that gets the 1984 kitsch just right and gets it so real, without getting exaggerated and nostalgic about it. Like, everything looks like shit. The office is the most gross. At Nike is the set dressing is disgusting. And everything just looks really bad and like still trapped in the 70s in a way. And it just doesn't like quite get as high as everyone involved thinks they're getting in terms of how invested it and emotionally grabbing it was to me. Because ultimately it just comes down to a bunch of board meetings, and the people who wrote this weren't as good as Aaron Sorkin as making it fast-paced and interesting. There is good writing here. I'll say that. Chris Messina really gets all the good lines, and he's playing David Falk, Michael Jordan's agent. But yeah, Ben Affleck is really fun as Phil Knight. Like, there are just like fun, exaggerated, versions of real people, but it's nothing really too special. But at the beginning of the movie is this thing that says Skydance Sports. So this Skydance, I'm not sure a lot of what their history is, but they have a division devoted just to making sports movies, apparently. And if they're just going to be going to 30 for 30s and like lifting story ideas from them, I have some suggestions. I would really, really love for them to, be some real bros and do Elway to Marino, because that is something that could really have some drama, have some, actual truly inside football, fly on the wall, tellings of a lot of these crazy stories like this, where John Elway basically bullied the Colts into trading him, and caused chaos to ripple through to affect Dan Marino, a fellow Hall of Famer, who was also a client of the central attorney of the narrative. Like, that documentary just lays it out perfectly. The man literally has his legal pads with his minute notes that he would keep about conversations and shit. So the research is done. Like, you have it all. But there's a lot of good meaty roles there. The two Escobars, I think I've talked about this before, about Pablo Escobar and then the soccer player who had shared the same surname on the Colombia national team. And that story is just nuts. It deserves to be told. But if there was one that I think had the most certainty, the best chance of being made, it's Survive in Advance, which tells the story of the North Carolina Wolfpack national championship team coached by Jim Valvano, which is guaranteed to give somebody an Oscar if they play that role. I'll just say that. It just hits all the right butterflies. Like, where's Jerry Bruckheimer? Why the fuck didn't you make this movie? For crying out loud. But yeah, it's worth your time if you've got nothing else going on. But Tetris is a better version of this movie. I'll just say that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah, you had posed this question about, what sports stories should be adapted. And the one that I thought of was, there's the sort of Netflix equivalent to 30 for 30 called Untold.
Yeah.
And I was thinking back to episodes of that. And there's one called Crimes and Penalties that is about the UHL specifically, which is the sort of minor league hockey organization in the U.S.
Ooh.
And there was a team, I think it was, let's see, what was it? The Danbury Thrashers, based in Connecticut in the, I think, 90s. And this team was bought by the trash mafia magnate that Tony Soprano was based on. And what he did is he bought the team and just ran it into the ground and just made bad decision after bad decision. And he actually installed his 17-year-old son as the team's general manager.
And his son's name was AJ.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was. That's right. Yeah. And yeah, so his 17-year-old son was ordering around all of these 30-year-old minor league hockey players, and he just ran it into the ground. And eventually, he got picked up for all of his crimes and had to sell off the team, and it's defunct now. But I think that could make for a good story.
I got good news for you, Matt. You picked a good one.
Oh, it's happening.
Because director Cooper Raiff, the filmmaker and actor who did Cha Cha Real Smooth, is going to be making the movie telling this story. It's going to be starring David Harbour and Cooper Hoffman. And it's so that I
didn't know that.
Yeah, that is at the bottom of the wiki article about it. So I will trust Deadline Hollywood. But that's exciting. Okay, I'm glad I know about that now. Mm-hmm. So, what can you report from the realm of Jeopardy? Have they finally involved a guillotine? If you don't press the button fast enough, does your head get lopped off now?
Well, they have changed up some of the rules, and I will get to why I think that is annoying. But this is Jeopardy Masters, which is the primetime version of Jeopardy that's hosted by Ken Jennings. He splits the hosting duties now with Mayim Bialik. She does the daytime regular game show, and then he does these special episode, week long things. And this one takes a bunch of recent people who have just done really well on the show and puts them in a tournament together, including Amy Schneider, who had a 39 game run recently, and James Holhauser, who is just legendary at this point as the guy who always goes in no matter what. And this is really, really good. I mean, I'm a Jeopardy fan. I think it's like one of the most perfect game shows out there. And it's nice after watching the last one of these, which was the celebrity tournament. It's nice to get a version of the show that actually has hard questions, because those, oh my God, some of those like softball, t-ball questions that they were serving up to the celebrities were so awful, and it was so easy, and it made it less fun to watch, where they're giving these people the hard questions, and so it's a lot more fun to watch. But the one thing that is really weird that I don't like about what they're trying to do is, ever since Trebek died, the producers of this show have been trying to like leave their mark on this show in some way or another. And it's kind of annoying, because it's like, just leave the show the way it is. It's perfect the way it is. And now what they're trying to do is they're showing the audience where like the double Jeopardy questions are. And I don't know why they're doing that. It seems very pointless. It seems to just kind of eat up time more than anything. And I think that maybe they're trying to sort of bite back against the idea that people thought that maybe they were like cheating and like showing like specific player, or like telling specific players where the double Jeopardy questions were. And I think that was like a rumor for a while, and so I don't know if they're trying to like fight back against that in some way. Like,
we're being transparent.
Yeah, we're being more transparent, and so I don't know. It's odd, and I really don't like it. And a lot of these producers are really trying to like leave their mark on the show. I don't know if you remember this, but back when they were trying to do their host search,
I didn't really pay too much attention to what was actually going on, but I know it happened. There was drama.
One of the producers of the show basically put on like a sham host search, where he basically pretended like they were looking for a new host, and they were doing all these guest hosts to basically give them like trial runs. But in the very end, he always was going to put himself as the new host of the show. Like, it was all just a sham. And
what?
And
that's fucking gross.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's pretty wild, because he actually, for what they did is they basically gave various people like week-long stretches where they did trial runs, and among those people were a bunch of like newscasters. I know Katie Couric was one of the eligible people, and Ken Jennings, of course, and this producer he gave himself a week-long stint, and then at the very end of the host search, he was like, no, it's going to be me. I'm going to do it. And it was all just a sham, basically. That people found that out through like leaked emails and stuff.
Jesus Christ. And how long did that last?
It didn't last at all. He basically, they announced that he was going to become the permanent host, and then somebody leaked those emails or those memos basically saying that was always the plan. And then he got fired from the show, and he's no longer a producer on it.
God bless. That's amazing. Now, Jeopardy was always the show I would watch with my grandma after I'd go swimming at the Mott public pool. And
it's classic.
I need to
it
get
holds
back
a lot
on
of
it.
memories.
Absolutely. And especially because it was like so hard, which makes me upset that they didn't just brutalize those celebrities like the ninnies that they are.
Yeah.
But now the time has come. It's time to get into the meat of the episode this week, and I am so grateful that I get to talk about Brian De Palma's, the prototype of these Mission Impossible movies. This movie is, if it's not in my top anything, but it means a great deal to me. My parents bought it on VHS, and I will always associate this movie with that 4:3 grain, that was worn into that fucking tape, because I watched that thing so much. And it didn't matter that it was all blown out and that our TV was shit. This movie was the greatest thing I'd ever seen in my life when I was 8 years old. And it all just, came down to, all of the qualities, that Tom Cruise brings to it. He was so awesome. and just as a movie star at that time, like for some reason he wasn't considered to be a weirdo yet. My parents still thought he was cool, and so I could think he was cool by extension. I wore sunglasses like he did. I did like the whole pretend like I was recording people, like with the camera in my bridge. But what makes this movie cook and work is its director and that trio of writers. Like, I don't know how the fuck they got all three of those guys to write on something together. I'm not sure what was used from who, but everything that wound up in this thing, worked. It had it reminded you of whatever the show was, even though I had never seen it. You could see the heritage built in within it, but then it was still just undeniably a star vehicle and a spectacle, like just a little bit of spectacle with some competent, conspiracy tinged storytelling, but with all of the noir sensibilities that De Palma brings to the equation. And it's very different from all the movies that was born from its roots, but it sank them deep with this one, and I didn't always keep up with some of the newer ones. I had to circle back on a few of them, but this is the one that I keep close to my side. I don't have to go looking for it. I know I love this movie, and I think that everyone who likes Mission Impossible should really do themselves a favor and come back to it, because it's special. They don't make movies like this anymore. They stopped making movies like this right after they made this one, as Matt will discuss when we follow up with Mission Impossible 2. But what was your relationship with this movie?
Yeah, I mean, I remember seeing it eventually when it came out. I didn't see it in theaters, but I distinctly remember that my mom went out and bought the DVD, and like my for some reason, I still don't know why this is a fact, but my mom was like one of the like early adopters of the DVD format.
Good for
and
her.
I had a DVD player in my house like way before like a lot of my friends or family and stuff like that, and I still don't really know why that was the case. I don't think she had any sort of special like knowledge of like the film industry and knew that it was going to be the one that survived over like Laserdisc or VHS. But I distinctly remember her buying the DVD and watching it all the time. And yeah, I mean, like you said, thinking it was really, really cool, just like really, really badass. And but going back to it now, I sort of appreciate it for the sort of the only one of these movies that is truly like auteur driven, where you can tell, yes, it is sort of a blockbuster film, but it's only partly that. It's still this vision of Brian De Palma. He still leaves his mark on the movie with the the close-ups and like the canted angles and the whip pans. Mm-hmm. And it's a filmmaker's movie still, and it's why it's one of, I think, the better installments of this series, and one that I think a lot of people, when they think about, they sort of see it as being dated or see it as being sort of cheesy, and I think it holds up a lot better than some films in this franchise, including one that was made 4 years after this movie that we'll talk about later. And so yeah, I really enjoyed going back to it. And before we go any further, though, I wanted to ask you, just to kind of set up this entire series that we're about to do over the next 3 weeks, which one of these films that you have seen, of the 6 that are out now, have you seen them all?
I have. Yeah, I'm fully caught up. I'm fully caught up.
Okay. So you have seen them all in the past. And so, yeah, I just want to get that out of the way. And then also, let me ask you this question. What, in your opinion, makes a good Mission Impossible film?
And it is a combination of things. But I have to have... I have to have a ticking clock. You have to light that fuse, motherfuckers. Like there has to be something that's going to blow up that like you know it's coming. You're seeing that fuse get smaller and smaller and burn away. You're seeing the timer tick down to 0, and once it hits 0, everything's gonna be fucked unless Tom Cruise can run fast enough and jump higher than anybody else and punch, harder and take more punches than any man alive. Like, this man takes a fucking motorcycle to the face at least 4 times in this entire series. So yeah, that's what a Mission Impossible movie is. If it's going to be worth my time at all, even like that's why like I even have love for the worst ones. But I don't know, the more recent ones are like more, I guess, maximalist, absolutely. But it doesn't matter like how quaint or blown up they are. They just have to take me on a fucking ride, and and then rub my face along the street a little bit, here and there, because these movies always hit hard, and and I guess that was always the appeal. Like, as far as where I'm at now, that's what I think about when I think of a Mission Impossible movie.
Yeah, same. I mean, it's like, for me, they need to set up, this seemingly impossible situation or mission, and then they come up with a plan, and over the course of the movie, everything that could possibly go wrong goes wrong, and then you watch the creative and genius ways in which they adapt the plan to come out on top. And that's kind of what makes a good Mission Impossible movie to me. And more recently, yeah, like you said, they definitely veered more towards the blockbuster sentiment, but I don't think it's done the series a disservice, because I think the later movies in this series are among the best, or at least that's the idea I have going into this series that we're doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, it's, I don't know, it can be a lot of things though. I mean, I think you could adapt this series, this IP onto a lot of things, and I think we're going to see that as we talk about these movies, because number 1 feels very different from number 2, which feels very different than number 3, I think they become a lot more alike once you get like a singular vision on them, because Macquarie has now done the last 2 plus the Dead Reckoning, the 7th one that's going to come out. So it's definitely become a lot more of a singular vision more recently, but these movies are a lot more different than people give them credit for.
Oh yeah, and I think that is why they endure, in a sense, because it has been so adaptable to what filmmakers are popular right now, what kinds of movies are popular now. Like, you could almost say that we're getting a little bit of, it's not Marvel-vacation, because like that's cheap to slap it with that label. But it's more than that. Like, there's a reason why Mission Impossible 2 is the way it is. There's a reason why Mission Impossible 1 was the way it is. But eventually, like, when you get the J.J. Abrams movie in the sequence, and you get and then all of a sudden you have the Brad Bird, appearance, it's because that's the era where people were just being given the opportunity to make crazy event movies. Certain filmmakers were being given their shot. And this was a franchise that, with producers open to just grabbing the best and brightest and giving them all the fucking, tools to facilitate all their craziest ideas. Because that is the other thing. It's like they push the limit, typically. Like, the whole point in getting different, directors involved, I think, on Cruise's part, is to, we gotta just take it to the next level, man. We gotta amp up this part of it. I love the last movie, man, but it was a little too artsy. So I think we get John Woo, we get all that crazy action and his cinematography in there, and it'll be just spectacular. But we gotta amp up the story. We've got to make it more interesting. We gotta make the stakes crazier. He has to have another love interest, but she looks more like my wife now. And that's just kind of how it goes for like the duration of this series. But I think that's why it works, because you have this kook at the helm of it, who is, it's a star-driven franchise, and it's like the only one left. And I guess is that a major driver also behind its success? It's because for some reason the star and the franchise itself still just have sustained each other as opposed to just dragging each other down. Because Hollywood easily could have just recast him or elevated like Jeremy Renner, you know, and then made it terrible, you know, but yeah, it didn't do that. It still is the man.
Well, I think it's kind of a, you know, whether or not you feel good or bad about it, it's a testament to, from this very first one, one of the first things you see when the opening credits come up are Cruise Wagner Productions, which is the now defunct production company that was started by Tom Cruise and his then agent Paula Wagner. And so from the very beginning, this was a Tom Cruise joint. You know, no matter what other director you put on these films, it's always gonna come back to Cruise's vision or his egomania or whatever you want to call it. And so I mean, he really like wedged his way in there from the beginning. And the second, it kind of comes to a head with the second film, which we'll talk about, but yeah, just to get back to the first one here, to start out, I mean, this film starts off with like one of the all-timer best, you know, scenes, and it's that sort of that mission that goes wrong in Prague. And yeah, I mean, I remember it being controversial because, especially with like the Mission Impossible fans of the TV series, because the entire team gets killed off, including Jon Voight's character, who was the protagonist of the TV show, or killed off. Yeah, I mean, what do you think of this sort of opening series of scenes?
I will say that this is the thing that pissed my parents off about it. Because like we don't want to spoil it, I guess anything for anyone who hasn't seen this ancient fucking movie. It's almost 30 fucking years old, for crying out loud. But it was because my mom watched the TV show growing up, and that was her beef with it. Was that Tom Cruise just took over this thing and he killed off all the characters I liked, or whatever. But it was, a really fucking ballsy thing to do, because it lulls the people who were fans of it into a false sense of security. They think they're just watching it's just going to be a really good episode, of TV here. And then, oh no, motherfuckers, you're in a fucking movie theater. Shit's about to get real, and yeah, it really, that is the strength of it, though, is the fact that it did the whole, it did the cynical corporate, reset the franchise thing, but it wasn't done in a cynical way or for cynical reasons. I don't think ultimately it served what made it shocking and like made the whole ride of the movie thrilling. Because now you're stuck with Ethan Hunt trying to figure out what the fuck happened. It's not quite as egregious as like Hideo Kojima tricking people who played Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty into thinking that they were going to be playing a Solid Snake the whole time, but maybe it's similar in that respect. Yeah,
it's just an amazing sequence, and just watching them all kind of get murked one by one, and you've got like big name actors in there that are just getting killed off after like 5 minutes of screen time, and including one of my favorite parts of this movie, Emilio Estevez, just being like completely like the Mighty Ducks guy getting crushed by an elevator. And his presence in this film is just like so like baffling to me. I mean, it works. It still works. He's not out of place, I would say, necessarily, but some of his like lines, like the hasta lasagna, don't get any anya, is just ridiculous.
And, it's great. But exactly. But it's what like makes it work, though, is because you have these people like they have star armor. They wouldn't get murdered in the first like act of any movie that they're in, and then boom, Jon Voight's dead. Boom, Emilio Estevez is getting his eyes poked out by cables. I don't know. I always thought it was funny. It was almost like a character just pressed enter on a computer button, and then those things shot down and then impaled him on his eyes. Oh God, because he was my favorite character. when I was a little kid, for some reason, I thought he was so cool because he said things like "Hasta lasagna, don't get any on you," and that piece of gum that has the red and green sides of it, that when you mash it together, it turns into an explosive. I thought that was so like novel. I would do that with my own gum because I would role play Ethan Hunt when I was a kid. Unironically, that's how invested into this movie I was.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to, playing, make believe as like James Bond or something like that, because they give him so many cool gadgets and so many cool little pieces of tech and
the mask pulls. Like that trope, it was born in this movie. That is a testament to the strength of it because of how long it has endured throughout it. But red light, green light, that piece of gum, it hasn't popped up again, has it?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it's just in this one, and
they need to bring that back. They need to. Simon Pegg just needs to throw a piece of gum at Ethan Hunt and be like, "You know what to do," in the middle of like a crazy sequence. But speaking of that, Estevez has said in an interview that Cruise regretted having his character be killed. And you can kind of see how they were always searching for another Emilio Estevez until they settled on the recurring elements that have started appearing since since the third one, I suppose, right?
Simon Pegg.
Yeah, like
yeah. I think he's been in them since 3. But yeah, they've always tried to sort of replace that character with like the Australian guy from Part 2. They were trying to, I think, do that, and it's sort of that comic relief type, But I guess it's kind of he's a little redundant because the hacker character is Ving Rhames, and you can't have two hackers, and so
that's true.
But yeah, that's very interesting. And speaking of, how do you feel about Ving? Just like the weirdest casting ever, like this giant black guy as the like smartest guy in these series of films, and the only guy who's been in every single one of these movies except for Tom Cruise. And so I don't know. How do you feel about Ving Rhames and his portrayal of Luther Strickland?
Because this was him at the height of his powers, post Pulp Fiction. Like, this man could literally do whatever the fuck he wanted to. And to be in this playing that role, he made that character more interesting to make him be like a beefy, cool black dude with a shaved head and a gold earring. Like, it just made you go like, what the fuck is that guy been and done? And that's kind of like, he had mystique. That's what he really brought to the character in this movie, at any rate. Because in their meet cute, when they're like recruiting him, it's like you get his resume and he just sells it perfectly. Just that, oh yeah, that was me. I took pride in that. Or it's like, I had nothing to do with that magnificent piece of work. I don't know, like that line delivery was just so good. But yeah, he is another part of it. You can't have a Mission Impossible movie without Ving Rhames in it. So there's like you gotta have Tom Cruise, you gotta have him, and then you gotta have his backup. You gotta have Luther on like a phone or like on a headset, being like, Ethan, you gotta do this, bang bang bang. You're like that. You gotta have that. It's essential to it.
Yeah, he's great. He makes the most of his pretty small amount of screen time, and I mean, and speaking of sort of making the most of your screen time, the aquarium scene, and Henry Cerny sort of pops up, and he does. I mean, that whole sequence is just incredible, just so well done. And he's another guy who, of all the weird sort of quirks of this franchise, probably one of the weirdest, or what's going to be one of the weirdest, is this actor who hasn't been in any of these movies since this first one is suddenly going to be in Dead Reckoning. So I'm very curious. I mean, this movie, even though it's the very first one in the franchise and it's nearly 30 years old, this movie is probably going to tie the most to the next one than any of the other previous ones, probably. I mean, because of that fact that Henry Czerny is going to be in it. So, yeah, what do you think of the aquarium scene?
Iconic. Yeah, cause like it's the slow boil. Cause yeah, it's I don't know I just want to break down. I want to set up that sequence. Ethan Hunt has just literally seen his whole team get wiped, and he watched on his little like camera his movie watch that he had that had like perfect resolution in 1996, so he could see Phelps bleeding out on a bridge, and then he's running. He finds a payphone. He screws like a special like piece of hardware on it, and then he calls in and he's talking to Henry Czerny's character, and he's just like, "My team is dead," and he's just like freaking out, and he doesn't know what's going on. And then Henry Czerny's character is just like, "Hey, just like meet me at this restaurant in Prague. I'll meet with you myself." And then Cruz is like, "Wait a minute, you're in Prague?" And he's just like, "An hour, hang up." And then that scene happens, and you just have Hunt like knowing, like he knows exactly what he's walking into. And you as the audience member are being given all the same information that Hunt is picking up. And if you are an observant watcher, you also are figuring out exactly what's happening too. And the slow like peeling back of the revelations of, oh yeah, this whole project was just trying to find who was fucking us over, and it's you piece of shit. That's what I loved about him. He just gets so like blunt at the end of it, like when he's like, "Enough is enough, Hunt. You've lied, cajoled, and killed, and I'm gonna make sure you die in hell," or like whatever the fuck he says. But the explosion that it builds to, with the water gushing down. Did they let Tom Cruise actually be like on set when that whole thing went off? When he runs away from it, is that actually him?
I think so. Yeah, I think it is him because it'd be very hard to fake that because the shot when the aquarium explodes and then the window of the restaurant explodes outwards, it's shot from the front. It's not like, they're not doing the stuntman thing where it's shooting him from the back of the head or whatever. And so that would have been very hard to fake in the 90s. So I believe it is actually him. And I think the way that they did it is they essentially just, had a shitload of water in a tank and then just dumped it all. And then, that big front window of the restaurant, they just made it a breakaway window that was made of fake glass and just had him sort of stay one step ahead of the water. And I think that's how they did it. But yeah, it's very unique. I mean, this movie starts, from the very beginning, again, like the sort of trend that we've seen in all these movies of Cruise, like needing to do his own stunts, like needing to prove for some reason that he can do his own stunts, whether it be his own hubris or, trying to glorify the powers of Xenu or whatever it is. He has to do his own stunts.
Yeah, or he's just doing it because it's fun. Who knows? But yeah, iconic either way. And that's really what makes this movie strong to me, is that it's just like one awesome thing after another. Because you get bogged down in a little bit of the twisty turny storytelling, which is really silly. Especially the whole thing about how he hops onto some Bible like web forum and then just like is able to communicate with an arms dealer somehow. He just cracks the code like a genius. Like that whole bit is silly. But I guess before we get too deep in the weeds, what do you think of the love interest in this movie? Or is she like a non-love interest? She's just like a femme fatale more than she's anything else. And that's pretty unique in these movies, unless I'm misremembering. I guess there are other like female characters that fit that bill too. But I'm glad there wasn't like an outright like, "Oh, I love you so much, Ethan. Oh, I'm gonna save you, baby." That kind of damsel in distress bullshit going on, because that got kind of lame after a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Emmanuelle Beret, the actress, I believe is her name, and she, I from what I remember, they had shot like actual like PG-13 sex scenes between her and Cruise, and chose to leave them out of the movie and sort of just imply a lot of things instead, which I
Yeah.
think was the right call, because it was unnecessary. I mean, it does create for sort of a weird atmosphere without those scenes when he like has that weird interrogation on the bed where he's like laying on top of her. It's just sort of weird without the context of those
Yeah.
love scenes. But yeah, it was fine. I find her presence in the film completely inoffensive, I guess. I'm glad that they didn't use her, in the other movies.
Yeah. Yeah. Gratefully, she got to stay dead, unlike her husband. But wouldn't it be something if they brought like Skeletor John Voight out in Dead Reckoning? That would really be something.
That would be incredible. Yeah, that would be absolutely nuts. I mean, I'm glad that the series hasn't veered too far in the cuckoo gonzo shit like that yet. But,
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah.
But like, who else really stood out in this cast? I guess like the whole cast really slaps. Like, cause we got
I mean, you got Gene Reno, and he's really great. I personally, I love how he's kind of the guy who's just like working, strictly for himself, and that scene, where Cruz tricks him, and then the one I probably my favorite scene with him is, and this is sort of a weird detail that I noticed, how they tried to sort of make in these first two films, they tried to make Ethan Hunt into almost like this Batman type character where he doesn't like to kill people, and then they just abandon that for the rest of the series. But there's that scene where Gene Reno's about to stab that firefighter, and Tom Cruise grabs his arm and is like, like no casualties or whatever, and so that was an interesting little detail that they tried to sort of superimpose on his character, but they just abandoned him because he's just gunning people down in like the later movies. And I'm glad for that, though. There's enough like Batman type characters out there.
And in this movie, I think that is only in there so that they can kind of set Jean Reno's character up to be a turncoat villain, at some point later on in the movie. Because he's also a helicopter pilot, apparently. Like, he's conveniently for the end. But he shows up along with Ving Rhames right when like the stakes have been set. It's like, okay, I'm gonna find out who Job is if I can steal the thing that I was trying to protect at the beginning of the movie. But the Langley sequence, which is the price of admission you pay to see it, this one, because it's when he's dangling on the wires. Iconic isn't even enough. Like, this is like burned into the silver screen forever. This part of the movie. What about it works?
Yeah, I mean, it's a masterful just like ratcheting up of tension. And as I was saying, earlier in our review, this is the scene where, they concoct the plan and everything seems, airtight, and then things start going wrong and they have to overcome it, step by step. They have to overcome each thing that goes wrong. And yeah, I love this scene, just how, this is such an impractical room. Like, it doesn't make any sense, like how it's like temperature controlled and like the floor is like pressurized. It senses like pressure, and it's so impractical, but it still works. And how De Palma cuts out all of the music for this sequence. It's just, all you can hear is either silence or just like Ethan Hunt's grunts as he like, falls 20 feet or, gets caught up on the rope. And I love everything about it, and especially how it ends with the knife falling and then stabbing right into the desk as sort of the thing that gives them away. And incredible, and it's been parodied to death at this point. Like, this scene has been in, I believe, in at least one of the earlier Scary Movie, installments, and more than that too. I mean, it was parodied to death on I'm sure like SNL and Mad TV and all that
And like
stuff.
kid cartoons. Because like we really need to shout out the music in this movie. You know, it's Danny Elfman's score, really restrained for that guy.
Yeah.
It really it's pitch perfect, because I forget that he did it. That is like how good it is in that way. It serves the movie very well. But what did you think of the end credit version by Bono and the Edge?
Oh God, I don't know. I don't think I stuck around for that.
Yeah, like it almost sounds like the Kill Bill theme. Like it has that same vibe to it.
Yeah, well, at least it's not Limp Bizkit like in the second one.
We'll get to that, because I just want to mention one other thing about the Langley, the Langley situation, and I guess another Mission Impossible trope as well after that. But at the conclusion, like the poor like CIA agent, the William Donlow guy, who's just the technician who sits at the knock desk, who finds the knife and is able to know that the knock list has been accessed, and he's getting and Henry Czerny's character's talking to his subordinate, and he's just like, tell no one of this, you understand? This didn't fucking happen. And he's like, okay, well, what do I do with him? You're gonna send him to a listening station in Alaska at the end of the day. Just mail him his clothes. That guy. Like, if Dead Reckoning doesn't involve them winding up at some listening station in Alaska with William Donlow like still there, like with a beard, like he's still been trapped there all this time, they are missing out on an opportunity. Because I thought about this man and what the fuck happened to him, and he did nothing wrong. He got bamboozled by the best spies in the game. It's not his fault.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be incredible. That would be such a great callback to just have that guy pop up again. But yeah, incredible sequence. And I mean, he's part of it too. He really, really sells it. And the like getting sick or getting diarrhea or whatever happens to him, that stuff's all really great with the pen in the coffee cup. Yeah. That's great as far as and I think that's one of the things I did want to cover when talking about this film is how much it feels outdated or not. And when they do sort of like the lo-fi spy shit, like the pen with the poison in it, I think it works. But once they start involving tech, that's when this film starts getting a little dated, with the watch computers and the even like the initial mask when Tom Cruise is like portraying that Russian general is really, really iffy, like the quality of it. And then, I mean, probably more the most apparent is like all the computer screens, as you had mentioned when Tom Cruise is emailing on that board, all the graphics just look very dated. And there's like when he hits send on that message, it does the little like the letter graphic. But I want to know, does the technology in this film contribute, any sort of feeling of this film like being of a lesser quality for you? Like, do you think the tech affects it adversely, or do you think it's, lends it some charm?
And it definitely gives the whole franchise a real place in a historical social context. Things were very different in 1996, even when they were trying to act like ahead of the curve, for the time. Mm-hmm. We have those things today. Like, we have the video watch, if you have like an Apple Watch or like a Fitbit or something like that, you fundamentally have that same capability today. It's not as novel as when it was used in this, but the whole point behind the gadgetry in this and in James Bond even is that, while it might be impossible at the time, it still solves some sort of need narratively for the characters. It makes sense that they would have a doohickey that does that, so the stuff that is lo-fi, absolutely still holds up. But there's a reason why that opening sequence you're seeing Tom Cruise mostly just on that tiny little monitor, with all that grain, so you couldn't see how bad it was until he was ripping it off of his face. And let me tell you, it was a lot more convincing on a fuzzy VHS tape than on like when I watched it on Paramount. It did not look nearly as good when I was a kid. And as soon as I saw that note, I was like, yeah, I think you're right about that. Even the fake Phelps at the end, the fake John Voight that was more convincing, and it hits a little bit more once he started like peeling his ear off.
Yeah, that one was definitely done better. I think they actually did that one using some digital trickery, some early digital trickery, and so yeah, that one does look much better. But yeah, I mean, speaking of the end of the film, or sort of the end sequence, the sort of helicopter train sequence, again, a really, really well done series of events, and just a perfect sort of final action scene. And I love everything about it, as far as the attaching the helicopter to the train, so he forces it in the tunnel. And I think my favorite, something I've never noticed before, but one of my favorite shots in this entire movie is the actual shot that you get of John Voight's like face smashing into the railroad tracks when the helicopter crashes.
Yeah, they fuck him up.
Yeah.
They did not do him. They did him dirty with that death too, because that doesn't really hold up very well either anymore. But it still is awesome nonetheless.
Yeah, it's very like, I don't know, it was jarringly graphic from what I remember. And yeah, is there anything you wanted to say about that whole sequence?
Yeah, this is just, you gotta have the capstone on that spectacle. The whole movie needs to be a roller coaster ride, but at the end, Tom Cruise needs to show you how much of a badass he really is, and then put you on the ass end of a bullet train and make it do loop-de-loops or whatever the fuck it is. So I don't know. It's just another reason to watch this movie. It's episodic. This basically is like someone just said, what if we did like 4 episodes of a TV show and just smashed it together? Gave it if it was an arc, and and you had some things going on. I don't know. It just works perfectly. And as far as the conclusion goes, it holds up, I think, even to the more modern, the spectacle that can be delivered, and that this man has pushed this franchise towards. Like, this is the one that set the tone, absolutely. And yeah, that last shot right there, all the way up to that helicopter blade almost getting his neck. I don't know. It's just, this movie's just quintessentially Tom Cruise. When I think of this man, I think of this movie specifically, and I'm gonna watch it whenever he dies. I'm gonna pour one out and burn my copy of Dianetics and watch this movie.
Yeah, so I mean, same. It's this is one of the good ones. This first one, and I'm really curious to see kind of where it's gonna land on my. Once we're finished watching all 6 of these, where it's going to land on my sort of rankings of these films. Because for me, going into these films, the ones that I think are most likely to change, I'm most likely to change my opinion on, are this one, number 1, number 3, and number 4. And I feel like those 3 are the ones that are constantly sort of replacing each other or changing places and sort of my mind's ranking of these films. So, but for this particular watch, I mean, I was reassured that this definitely still holds up, and I would encourage anybody to go watch it.
Absolutely. It's a tweener, to be sure. There's parts of it that maybe don't tickle everyone's funny bone, but yeah, I'm a little nostalgia slut for this movie, and I'm a nostalgia slut for the second one, but I'll let you introduce it.
Yeah, so now on to Mission Impossible 2, directed by John Woo, came out in the year 2000. And this is widely considered the worst entry. And I don't think there's any, like, nobody makes any bones about that. And I think Mission Impossible 2 lives up to its reputation by being a John Woo movie first and a Mission Impossible movie second. And there was reports on set that there was turmoil between Woo and literally every other person that was making this film. He constantly churned through people behind the camera, firing the film's editor at one point, firing the film's cinematographer at one point. Well, at the same time, he was fighting a war on two fronts by, constantly butting heads with Tom Cruise. Wow. And I think at the end of the day, he actually got locked out of the editing room for this movie by Cruise himself and just got, kicked to the curb, essentially. Wow. And, but I still get the sense that in the end, John Woo won out on his vision because this film is just a cacophony of woo-isms. It's slow motion, the dual wielding pistols, the drop kicks, the bicycle kicks, the kung fu chops, and of course the pigeons.
So many fucking pigeons.
He completely misses the point of the assignment, and I don't think the film is completely without its merits, but this is the movie, this is the hump that we must get over before we get to greener pastures with this series. And I'll sort of leave it there, but yeah, what are your initial thoughts on Mission Impossible 2?
Yeah, this movie was just about being cool, and it's so absurd. It is such a silly, dopey fucking movie. And it's hard to believe that Robert Towne was involved in this, but like he was just a holdover from the first one, I think. But when you get down to it, yeah, there's nothing mysterious about this movie. There's nothing interesting about its story. It's so dull and boring, but it is so awesome. Everything is so like stupidly awesome. Even though like it's like, I don't know. I can't just say that it is awe-inspiring and amazing while also saying it's shit, but it is. I don't know why, but like I can't help but have affection for it. Like sure. Even like the villain, Dougray Scott, he's just such a weirdo. And his villain, like not his villain, his sidekick, he's so bullied. He like cuts the man's finger off for crying out loud with a fucking cigar snipper. But yeah, what do we make of Tandy, or is it how do we properly pronounce it? It still is Tandy? Okay.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Tandy Newton. She was pretty awesome in this as like a thief. She's like something like that. She's like a safe cracker lady.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a thief that they prostitute out to complete their mission, basically.
It's like, you used to date our villain, so you're gonna have to, be our agent on the inside. And it's just so funny because this movie is just Tom Cruise and Dougray Scott cucking each other back and forth. You know what I mean? And like, there's even a part where Dougray Scott is wearing Tom Cruise's face.
Yeah.
Acting like he's Tom Cruise more than once. Yeah. More than once.
Yeah, this film goes all out with the masks. I think this is out of all the films in the series, this is the one that does the masks the most. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But yeah, I mean, it's gosh, I don't even know like where to start. But I guess like this movie is like hopelessly from the year 2000.
Hopelessly, to a fault, an utter fault.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we can look at it and sort of be nostalgic about it.
Yeah.
And it kind of it gives us sort of those, pit of your stomach sort of almost cloying nostalgic feelings as you're watching it, and reminiscing type feelings. But for a lot of people, I want to know what a 20-year-old thinks of this movie, because they probably just think it's absolute dog shit because of that very same fact. But I just love that, you are immediately put back in the year 2000, even from the first 10 minutes with, that airplane scene and like the chugging guitars when, Dougray Scott rips off Tom Cruise's face and it's just like jun 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 and the weird like Afro pop song as
Yeah.
Tom Cruise is like cliff climbing and then of course the remix of the awful like new metal remix of the intro song over the opening credits. It's just like from the get-go, this movie is from the year 2000.
And they made every bad choice that the year 2000s, could have possibly, inspired them to make. The millennial turn did no one any favors, as we all know from our vantage point today. But for this series, I don't know what happened to Tom Cruise where he was like, yeah, this really successful blockbuster spy thing I have going on here. I want it to be more like, let me see here. I want to do Face Off. That's what I want to do. I want to literally just take faces off. It's a dumb joke. Everyone has made that joke. But that's pretty much what happened. He's like, who directed Face Off? John Woo did. So like that was the logic. And it completely kind of like made it really hard to know what a Mission Impossible movie was supposed to be for a second, because then it suddenly just became all of this nonsense. And like, but I do want to bring this up. What did you make of all of the rhetoric about making, really dangerous viruses in a laboratory so that you could, better sell, like vaccines and treatments on the open market for capitalistic reasons?
Yeah, it's very timely, with like the COVID pandemic and stuff, and yeah, I mean it
Chimera.
definitely Chimera the film certainly can be slotted into the the year 2020 in many different ways with the the COVID comparisons, and I'm sure that the plot identifies with a lot of people who a lot of people's conspiracies and stuff like that. And
That's
so,
exactly where I'm going with it.
so it's very interesting. It does give
it's predictive programming, Matt. It's predictive programming.
it gives you a different lens with which to watch the movie from. Maybe that makes it a little more interesting than the movie deserves. But the plot, I mean, one of the weird things that I thought about the first movie with how people reviewed the first movie is a lot of people called it too confusing, and the plot of this movie is almost like a overcorrection on that idea, in that the plot is incredibly simplified in this, and with the whole chimera thing. And I think there's even a point in the film where Ving Rhames like literally almost breaks the fourth wall when Tom Cruise tells him, is basically feeding him exposition about chimera, and then Ving Rhames' response is, "Oh, it's that simple, really?" And it's fourth wall breaking. They're talking directly to those people who had a problem with the first movie being too confusing, and so, but it is an overcorrection. The plot is oversimplified to almost the point of being stupid.
Yeah, no, it is stupid. It categorically is stupid. Like, it's utter, nonsense, and it is just an excuse to, have a cheap love story inserted into a movie that didn't really need it, so that we could have a really awesome showdown at some point in the more than once in the movie, I guess. But that whole thing with the motorcycles at the end, it's like, it didn't matter how old like when I saw this movie when I was 10 years old, and it got like, I was so bored and tired. Like, I wanted to just take a nap after I like first saw this movie. And by the time it was at the end and people's faces were getting bashed in for the 1,000th time, but it was all made worth it because of Tom Cruise riding that motorcycle with a leather jacket with explosions all around him. Like, that stuff did fuel me a little bit, but God damn it, that hair was vile.
Oh yeah, his like shoulder length hair,
his Vanilla Sky era hair. For some reason, when he made movies that year, that's what his hairstyle was.
Yeah, it's so ridiculous, and it highlights how ridiculous a lot of like I think John Woo is such a cornball, and sometimes his style works for the types of films that he makes. When he's off doing his kung fu movies and his action movies, but it doesn't work for something like this when you have these weird like slow motion scenes of like Tom Cruise and Tandy Newton looking at each other while their convertibles are locked in a stalemate and
Yeah.
they're spinning and
Yeah, like, oh, that pissed me off so much. Even that was so, it was so dumb. Like that car chase that like where they meet cute, where he's like, I'm recruiting you. Like that part killed me. I hated that so much as a kid, but now I love it. I don't know what to make of that.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely it's sort of a guilty pleasure, something that you could look at in sort of that lens. And I mean that's like a lot of stuff in this film, just all as I said earlier, all these John Woo isms with that and the pigeons and all of like that fist fight that Tom Cruise and Dougray Scott have at the end is so ridiculous with all the the moves that they're doing, like the drop kicks and like the bicycle kicks and the like chops to the side of the neck, and it's just so crazy. And it's, I don't know, it's, again, I'll go back to the idea that this is like a John Woo movie first and a Mission Impossible movie second. And in that sort of idea, I think John Woo sort of won out in the end, his vision in the end, whether or not that vision was successful or not.
Who had the most fun making this movie, and was it Anthony Hopkins?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, he showed up to set for like 5 days and probably collected like a cool like $2 million for it. And yeah, I mean he's great in this. I mean he again, making the most of your small amount of screen time. He's great. And
never to be seen again. Even though like they've tried to have like an M-like character such as this in the series on occasion. This was I guess, I don't know why they went with him, because it made it feel too much like a James Bond movie.
Yeah, it totally does. I mean, that might have been the direction that they were trying to go with this too, because I do know that, I mean, the whole reason behind hiring John Woo in the first place was because Tom Cruise wanted a more action-packed film, and I mean, he certainly got it, I guess.
Yeah, goes without saying. So, yeah. What else do you really? Yeah, what else is there to say? Really, really long. Really,
it is, or it feels long at least. I mean, long. It is. I think it is only a hair over like 2 hours, but yeah, it does feel long. And,
I misread the note. There is okay. I never heard of this. There is another cut of this fucking movie.
Yeah, there's another cut. As I was sort of researching it, I found out about this, that somewhere out there is a 163-minute cut of this movie that contains a lot of deceit.
I need to pause you there, Matt. I got a girl screaming on the patio. I need to see what's going on.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Is everything okay?
Seats on her head.
Oh. So yes, what you were saying, there was a 163-minute cut of this film that contained deleted and extended scenes and more action, and it was essentially what would be considered the R-rated cut of this movie, because it is way more violent. And that version of the movie was actually stolen like from the like editing bay at Paramount, and it was circulated in like bootleg VHS circles for a long time. But the thing is, the thing that kind of sucks is it has now sort of disappeared off the face of the earth. And somewhere out there, somebody probably has it still, but they just haven't come forward. But nobody's really been able to get a hold of that since.
Oh, that's a very interesting little piece of information on a grail of cinema. Because I think that might have, I don't know, would the movie have been improved by more violence and some more context? maybe there would have been more of a story there and some connective tissue between some of the sequences that they've strung together.
Yeah, I mean, quite possibly, because yeah, I mean, it would be about 40 something minutes longer, and I think it probably would have a lot more context and a lot more downtime too, probably, because that's sort of the interesting thing about John Woo, and the one thing I will give him credit for his sort of directing is that he gets a good mix of action, but then he also knows when to be really intimate, and do sort of these sort of smaller scale intimate scenes. And I think those are sort of among some of the best scenes in the film. The one of the highlight scenes for me is the cigar, the scene where he cuts off Dougray Scott cuts off his henchman's finger with the cigar cutter. I don't know, I just remember being so disturbed by that when I was a kid.
Me too.
And yeah, I was like that scene really fucked me up. And then also another thing too, speaking of disturbing imagery, the digital camera photos of that guy as he slowly wastes away from Chimera. I remember being so disturbed by that as a kid, so much so that it gave me nightmares, that imagery. And
the music at the beginning, or not the music, there's diegetic children singing Ring Around the Rosie while that scientist is standing there watching them while he's holding a chimera in his hands. That part haunts my dreams.
Yeah, it's basically the playground scene from Terminator 2, where where Sarah Connor is looking through the chain link fence at all the kids, and then they all blow up. Basically same deal, I think. And,
oh yeah.
So yeah, I mean he knows when to sort of make it more intimate, and I think those are among the more successful parts of the movie. And yeah, speaking of that. They sort of do a redux version of the Langley break-in this film, where Ethan Hunt breaks into that skyscraper. And what do you make of that scene? Was that successful for you? Do you think it was just too much of a rehash, or what?
It did kind of feel like he was just going with what worked last time a little bit, and that was if this movie has a fault it can't deny, it's that it just went to the same plays in the playbook a little too often with the mask pulls and the but it did introduce the voice changing tape. That was cool. That was the cool addition that made some of their goofy things a little bit more fantastical. But the one, I guess, why that sequence works better, I guess, than the original is that it eventually erupts into a fucking skyscraper encompassing gunfight. That is the one difference. The key difference between the second and the first is, in the first, I don't think Tom Cruise fires a gun once, and in this one he's shooting constantly, because it's a John Woo movie. And can you imagine a John Woo movie if the protagonist didn't fire handguns akimbo multiple times? So it is a little it's different in that sense, but it kind of just gets bogged down in all the same silliness of all the rest of it. I think I would much rather watch the original Langley sequence than the hotel, or the skyscraper in this one.
Yeah, same. I do think it is among one of the more successful sort of vignettes in this film. The thing that I really picked up on this sort of rewatch was the person who did the score for this movie is a very young Hans Zimmer. And one of the things I picked up on was how similar the score is in this scene to very similar scenes from The Dark Knight, where the scenes in China when Bruce Wayne has to abduct that Chinese stockbroker or whoever he is, and incredibly similar score. And you get little hints of his Dark Knight score in there. And
so
yeah.
Do you think that Chris Nolan watched Mission Impossible 2 when he thought about hiring Hans Zimmer?
I think it's entirely possible. Yeah, I definitely, because it is very similar, and even more so than that, towards the end of the film, when on the action scene on that island, the car chase scene, there is another bit of music there that sounds very similar to. I know that you probably don't have a frame of reference for this, but there is a track off of the Inception soundtrack called Mombasa.
Oh no, I know.
And
I'm familiar.
do you know that one? Okay, good. Yeah, it's incredibly. I mean, I would tell anybody who's listening to this, just go YouTube that track off the Inception soundtrack and listen to it side by side with the car motorcycle chase scene towards the end of this movie, and it's very, Hans Zimmer is pulling from his bag of tricks for this film, and for those films, the Nolan films, and
wow.
Very, very similar. And the other thing that makes the skyscraper scene work for me is this idea that they should have expanded on. Maybe it was part of that 160-minute cut of this film, but the idea that Sean Ambrose knows exactly what Ethan Hunt is thinking at all times and knows exactly how, he plans out Ethan Hunt's like exact moves perfectly. And so that skyscraper scene, the entire time it's going on, Dougray Scott is like narrating what he thinks is, Ethan Hunt is going to do. And I think that's a really cool detail that I wish they would have expanded on for the movie, that basically, Sean Ambrose is Ethan Hunt's equal in every way.
Yeah, and because that's the thing that I think was taken out to reinforce the whole love triangle instead. They wanted to focus on that. They just wanted him to be an evil guy. They didn't want him to be a worthy villain in that sense. But you are right. Like the remnant of it is in the skyscraper sequence at the very least. Where did you think the franchise would go from here? Did you even care after you first saw it? Like, because I think for a little bit, it maybe like, because did this movie make a lot of money? Like,
yes, yeah.
Okay, so it still made money.
It was the highest grossing movie of 2000.
Holy shit! Really?
It was, yeah.
That's nuts. Because it really went off the rails after that.
Oh yeah, it definitely did. And yeah, I mean, despite that fact that this was the highest grossing movie of 2000, there was still, I mean, you could tell that sort of the spirits were down after making this movie, because I mean, even so, people didn't like it at all, and it left the franchise in a really weird place. And you could tell that was the case because there was a whole like 6 years, I believe, between this one and or maybe even 7 years between this one and the third one. So you could tell that people were really down on this franchise after that. And to be quite honest, I don't even remember how I felt. I mean, I think honestly, I watched this movie, and then just because of the age I was, I would have been 11 years old. I just didn't give a shit. I was just
exactly.
I didn't care at all. So, but yeah, it's interesting how down people were on it, and how much. I mean, just go read up about all the behind the scenes shit with this movie. It was crazy. Just how many people would butt heads. And Tom Cruise, this movie was supposed to be made in a year earlier, but Tom Cruise was too busy making Eyes Wide Shut, and that delayed this movie an entire year, because Kubrick was just holding on to Cruise, demanding reshoots, demanding all the takes, 100 takes and stuff like that. And so yeah, this movie got fucked by Eyes Wide Shut, basically.
That's amazing. Oh my god. Well, anything else you wanted to say about it?
Basically, just, I mean, we didn't touch a ton on sort of the entire last half hour, but it really does just go completely off the rails. And I think that, that entire last half hour is pretty like unsalvageable in my opinion. Like, it's so bad, and it's just cornball to the max. And The one thing though that I do think is cool is I do like the mask reveal with the henchman where he put the duct tape over his mouth and makes Dougray Scott shoot to death his own henchman.
That was awesome. Yeah.
It is cool, yeah, and it very graphic, very very graphic, and Brendan Gleeson, who we haven't even mentioned yet, is he's just standing there off in the corner, just looking like appalled at what's happening. This man being shot to death in front of him, and then the reveal when Dougray Scott pulls the mask aside, and it's playing. One of the other weird things about the soundtrack in this film, or the score, I should say, is the usage of like weird like Gregorian chanting type music, and that's one of the scenes where he pulls the mask off, and it's doing like this sort of like sort of like choral type music, and very weird. And,
but that's kind of a John Wooism though, isn't it? Like that's the kind of like thing he would play over top his doves.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's like sort of that choral, like, sort of Carmina Burana type stuff, and it's pretty cheesy, and I think that's kind of, I don't know, I guess to sort of start bringing it home, that's really the only way that you can watch this movie from a 2023 lens, is just from enjoy the cheese, I guess.
Yeah, it's like this is like Face Off, this is like Broken Arrow. This is, John Woo firmly in his Hollywood era, when this is the kind of shit he would make. And I can totally see why he would clash heads with Tom Cruise, because John Woo is just like, hey, why are you trying to tell me what to do? Like, you've hired me for a job. Let me do my job, Because next week, we're going to be... Oh, that was not what I wanted to do. Let me pull that down. Next week, we're going to be covering the next two films in the series. And that is Mission Impossible 3 and Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. And I think the reason we get those two movies specifically is because of how this one was received.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think Mission Impossible 3 brings this franchise into the modern era, where one of the ways that I split up these films is 1 and 2 are kind of off by themselves in the previous decades, in the year, the 90s, in the 2000s. But even though Mission Impossible 3 was only made 6 or 7 years after this one, it firmly places this series into the modern era.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking forward to returning to those. They were the only ones that I've seen in a theater, actually, are those two. So it's fascinating how that works. The Mentionables this week. It's you. I hope, Matt, that you purchased your copy of Tears of the Kingdom legally from a licensed retailer.
I did. Yes, I shilled out the $69.99 for this game. This is Nintendo's very first $70 game.
Wow.
Which seemed like it's gonna sort of be the AAA price point from now on. But yes, so far in my opinion, anyways, probably worth it, because this is from what I can tell already, this is going to be a game I'm going to be spending a lot of time on. There's a lot here. There's a lot to do. There's a lot to see. And this is unashamedly a sequel to Breath of the Wild. And so if you didn't like that direction for the series, I would tell you to stay clear away from this one, because it is very much more of the same, but sort of taken to the nth degree. And they've sort of doubled down on the like creation aspect of Breath of the Wild, where there were all of these sort of like almost Minecraft type tools you could play with, where you could create your own vehicles, or create your own like bridges and structures. And they've sort of doubled down on that fact, which in my opinion, is kind of a take it or leave it aspect of this series where I could care less, honestly. What I'm more in for these games for is the sense of exploration, and yeah, it's definitely there because I spent about 3.5 hours playing this game yesterday, and I just got off the like introductory island that you start on,
Oh shit.
and I finally got to the part where the game, like the open world, opens up, and so yeah, this is going to be a major undertaking, I think, and but I'm very much enjoying it so
Right
far.
on. I'll have to check that out because if I'm going to spend $70 on a game, I'm grateful for things like Game Pass so I can try things out. Because after I tried to play Redfall, and holy
God.
shit, I'll just leave it at that. I'll just leave that one there. Not worth the $70. I kind of have some weird mentionables this week. It's two like YouTube things that have kind of been dominating my attentions for the last few weeks. But Chris Gore and his gang at Film Threat and like other critics from around the whole sphere are doing a like faux court trial, contending that Disney killed Star Wars. And there's a defense, there's a prosecution, there's people who are saying, hey, no, trying to defend them and say that Disney did nothing wrong. But it's fun, but you find out a lot of interesting things that you didn't know about, because I don't know about you, Matt, I haven't read Bob Iger's autobiography, which really kind of from the way that the prosecution was putting it out there. This is a man who lied to George Lucas, and that's the main contention. He lied to him, and he told him that Lucasfilm would be given the Pixar treatment. They would be given the Marvel treatment. And he was lied to, damn it. He was lied to. That's the main takeaway from the latest episode this week. But another thing that I've really been investing in is Sam Hyde's Fishbowl.tv, which is a kind of a throwback to like one of the like it's basically just a psychotic version of Big Brother. That's what it is. It's Big Brother on like stream. I don't know if it's where it was streaming at, but I don't even know if it's going to keep going. But he just bought a house and he rigged cameras everywhere. There's like speakers everywhere, and he just has people living in there doing challenges, all trying to like compete to win money, and it's ridiculous. It is the most like autistic, Aspergered out, post-ironic, surreal, absurdist bullshit ever. But at the same time, it's all real. And he's in trouble, and I don't know if they're going to keep doing it, because people could pay money and then have like what do you call it? It's not live, not TV. And you could have like a text to speech thing, like you can on a lot of streaming things. And some edgelords got in there and said some really awful things, and there's no one there to censor it, because it's just running perpetually. It's like it's autonomous at this point. But now he's lost all of his access to Stripe payments. So I guess like watch the clips at least, because the show might not be long for this world. But I appreciated it for what it was. What is your pick of the week?
I'd probably say Mission Impossible 1, because I think it's the film that I watched this week that I think deserves the most reappraisal, because I do think a lot of people just, especially nowadays, just like to pass it off as being too dated or being too like corny. And I think in many ways it holds up better than the second one. So, and it's a better movie too. And so, yeah, I would say Mission Impossible 1.
I'll echo that completely. I would say if you're drunk, watch Mission Impossible 2. But, if you actually want to have a good time and watch a better film, there's only one choice. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you all next week when we dive into the the J.J. Abrams, Brad Bird era of the franchise. Take care, everyone, and have a good week.